Blade. Vampire Hunter. Ooh. Watch this episode as I give this guy a home in my toy photography workshop. So I got this figure from Prey Collection Studios. It's a Patreon service on the internet, and it's a fellow that models figures from pop culture. One of the last months is Blade, and I've decided to try to build a diorama of it just to give me a bit of exercise and a bit of creative oomph, if you will. So I picked the character. There were many characters to choose from, and I picked Blade, and through various delays in my life and various things that have been going on, it's been a very hectic couple months. I haven't really had a chance to put Blade here to work. I printed him off, I painted him up, but that's pretty much it, right? And he sat on my shelf for a couple months, and I kept on thinking of how to use him in a way that is interesting and exciting and useful. And I think I finally came up with it. But it was kind of a bit of a process, so let's start on that journey. So while this figure was sitting on my shelf, I spent a lot of time trying to come up with ideas, and the ideas that were floating in the back of my brain was placing Blade in front of this Gothic building, or even inside this Gothic building. And even went so far as to print off some Gothic windows to support this diorama. And I started assembling it, then I realized a horrible flaw in my plan. And that's Blade was not sitting properly on the platform that I made. And when I looked closely, I realized that the mistake I made was that Blade has this flowing jacket, and it has these two posts to go on this stand that comes with the figure that I hadn't printed off. But it only stands up the way he is because of those posts. So if those posts go away, there's no room for the jacket on the diorama anymore, which means my ideas go out the window. So now it's time for Plan B. My backup plan was to use the stand that came with the figure, which is this ruined concrete structure with a symbol on it, which fits the figure perfectly, and then use that to build a ruins of a Gothic building to place Blade in. So the first step with the ruins is to actually ruin those windows that I spent so long trying to make perfect. And before I assembled everything, I spray painted the stand just to make sure it had a nice coat of primer to accept the paint that was coming later. I then assembled the basic structure of the crumbling Gothic building with some XPS foam and some glue. And I was also able to recycle the gravestones that I used from my last tutorial, which was nice. Now the base itself, or the ground itself, was smooth, and I wanted to give it some texture. So I used some spackle for this, which starts off pink, but as it dries, it becomes white. I spread out that spackle on the base of the styrofoam to give the ground some texture. And while I was doing that, added in some rubble bits and some of the broken pieces from the window, just to give it that broken down pile of rubble look. Then I set the diorama aside overnight to dry. So once the spackle was dry, I added a layer of Mod Podge and black to the diorama. Then I decided to spray paint a dark gray coat over the stone. I normally use a brush for this, but when I was putting on the black base coat, I realized that it was very hard to get underneath all of the rubble and bits with the brush, so I decided to use an airbrush just to make it easier on myself. And I think I actually ended up liking the effect better because the lighter coat brought out more of the detail. And I like the effect so much that I actually decided to do a couple passes of gray just to bring out even more of those details and add in some shadows and contrast to the whole piece. And when I was done, I added a quick dry brush to bring out some more details before I moved on to the next step.
The next step was to do a weathering pass. I have a selection of weathering paints from mud and rust and grime and grit, and I used that to selectively add in some weathering to the piece, which really kind of gave it that old look. I even added a little bit of red to the symbol on the base, just to kind of indicate that this is an important symbol and not just random decoration. I was actually pretty happy with how this was going so far. Now the groundwork itself needed some covering, so I used some real moss that I've been using in my studio for many shots, and it's actually been surviving for years in my studio, but I decided to use this as ground covering for my diorama, partly because I didn't have any fake flocking, and partly because this was available and it was starting to rain outside and I didn't want to go outside to get wet, so I figured I'd recycle what I had. So I just simply put it on by putting down a layer of glue on the styrofoam, covering it with moss and little bits of dirt just to give that ground look, and it really is effective because it really is literally ground. Then when that was done, I took a watered down mix of white glue and water and sprayed it onto the moss, which allows the moss to get locked in when it all dries. The glue dries clear, but it makes sure everything stays in place. It's looking good, so I set it aside to dry overnight. I set up a couple Lume Cube lights to light up Blade. I put a key light in front to kind of give the whole scene a little bit of light. Then in the back, I took another Lume Cube and used it as a backlight, kind of simulating what the moon would look like, kind of shining through the ruins and giving some backlight on the Blade. And then I used a smoke machine to add a little bit of atmosphere. And then after that, it was just time to click the shutter and see what I got. Then after a little bit of time in Photoshop, I was able to come up with this final image.
So that's my diorama, which is this guy right here. As you can see, it's complete and I think it's worked out really well. I just want to share one final thought I had while I was working on this diorama is it seems like a lot of work to put into something that honestly I am probably going to throw away. You might say, how can you put so much time and effort into things if you're just going to throw them away? And the reason is that this is not the end product of what I want to do. The photography is the end product for what I want to do. This here, as much work as it is, it's a tool to get me to where I want to go. And I treat it just the same way as Hollywood treats all of its sets. They build stuff, they film their scenes that they need to film, then they take the sets and they stick them in the bin. And that's probably what I'm going to do with this. It's not that I'm not really proud of this. I think it looks really cool. It's just I have no place to store it, and I don't want to spend money on storage space that I don't have just to keep this around when I may never use it again. I'm probably not going to throw it away right away. Because I'll throw it on a shelf, and then at some point in time I'll run out of shelf space, and I will Sophie's choice and say I want to keep that one, and that one, and these ones here have to go away because I don't have the room anymore, and that's just the way it is. And one of the benefits of this is that I don't need to live with my mistakes. When I look at this, I can see a lot of things I'm proud of. The terrain in the back, the rubble, this looks fantastic. Some of the weathering looks great, but it's not perfect. And I don't have to live with those mistakes. I don't have to keep this on a shelf and 20 years from now look back on it and say, what were you thinking, Dave? Really? What the hell were you thinking? But what I do is I take the lessons from these builds, internalize it in my brain, and then I take the end result and I put it aside and I work on the next thing. And it's not like I don't throw away every single thing. I do keep some stuff around, and I probably will keep them around for as long as I can foresee. For example, this is the very first little diorama that I made. Just a very simple item of a skeleton kind of behind a brick wall. And I made this for a photo, as I always do. I will keep this around as kind of a memento. This is where I started, and then I'll be able, with the stuff I'm building in the future, that's I'll be able to see how I progressed as this. But all of this is a learning tool for me. All of this is a way to express myself through photography, and they're all just tools, which means they're all fungible. So that's basically what I view these as. It's one reason why I don't necessarily finish off the backs. If you look at most of my work, for example, this back is not finished. There's an edge here that's not painted. I don't care. It doesn't see camera. Who gives a crap? The back of the tombstone here is also not finished, and I don't care because the camera doesn't see it. It doesn't really exist, doesn't really matter. I love making these dioramas. I think it really adds to my creativity, and it just keeps me busy and active and engaged. But however, it is ultimately just a tool, and once the tool is used up, it goes away. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Studio Dave. I am Dave. If you like more of my content, please click subscribe, and I'll be producing stuff as I produce it. I don't promise schedules because I don't know what my life is like. This is a hobby for me. This is not a job. However, hit subscribe to see more of my stuff, and I will see you next time. It's also why I am not sad that this figure here got destroyed and damaged at the last minute when the leg broke off and the paint job got a bit scuffed. I don't care. This is not a lifelong memory. This is just one step in the journey. So, it is what it is.